William, man, super glad and excited to have you on the Books for Guys podcast. As we were already chatting it up a little bit, and it was pretty cool. I noticed you were based out of Oklahoma City, which I've been
Yes.
to several times.
Yeah.
And I think
Arkansas
you're,
guy, right?
yeah, and I think you're our first guest from the state of Oklahoma. So welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Yeah. No, but William, I've been excited, man. I've been looking up just a lot of your background as I was preparing for this conversation with you. I mean, obviously your latest book, The Superman Wars,
Yeah.
caught my attention. Just, I grew up watching Batman, Superman, really the cartoons as a kid.
That
And
was my introduction too. Yeah.
yeah, and so, obviously been a fan of the movies and comics for a long time, but I didn't really know the backstory or the background of all the chaos that's involved with this and what you write about in your latest book, and we'll jump into that, but I also wanted to highlight, I mean, you're the president of WriterCon, which I
Yeah.
definitely wanna know more about. You're a publisher, Babylon Books. I mean, I think I saw where you've authored and published over 60 books yourself, which is incredible.
I think
And
this is
so
67, although I might have lost count somewhere. Who knows? But I think that's right.
67. Yeah, and plenty more to come. But no, William, if you would just take a minute, just kind of share a little bit of your story and just I mean, you've been writing
hmm
for a long time now. Where
I
did that
have.
interest come from and how has that progressed over the years?
I mean, who knows? I always loved books. I was reading at an early age, probably just like you, and reading everything in sight, we had a neighborhood library very close to where I lived, which was it was walking distance and in an era when people walked everywhere. And that's where I found so many books and librarians who took real interest in this nerdy kid who kept dropping by and immersing himself in books. And I was telling people I wanted to be a writer when I was 7, according to my mom. And she's my mom, so we got to believe it, right? And actually, first I wanted to be a librarian, but then at some point I realized, these books aren't spontaneously generated. Somebody writes them. Like that's their job. And I thought, well, that's the job I want. What could be cooler than that? And I started thinking about it and sending things out. I got my first rejection letter when I was 11, which I could prove because I've still got it, and like many, many, many more that came after that. And there's a reason why that stuff was getting rejected. It wasn't very good, but you learn as you go. And writing is like anything else, I think. You've got to put in your 10,000 hours or whatever, and the more you do, the better at it you get. And eventually, I had something publishable. And my first book, Primary Justice, a legal thriller, was published in 91, and I've been going ever since.
Yeah. That's incredible. Was the book that you got rejected by at 11, what type of story was
That
it?
was a poem, actually.
Poem,
I'd
okay.
written this, I thought, completely brilliant poem about the Oklahoma land run, but highlights did not like it as well as I did.
Yeah, yeah. Well, this is interesting. So you've been writing, reading since a very young age. I'm assuming, I mean, was that something your mother or parents had an influence on? I mean, did they always recommend reading to you, or did you just pick it up and you really learned to enjoy it on your own?
I am sure my mother did. She had taught school herself in the early days when my dad was still in school himself, and I think she understood the value of writing. She might not have wanted me to turn it into a career, but at least when it happened, she understood this is a good thing. This is, a cool thing that a lot of people admire. So
Yeah.
there's that.
No, that's fascinating. My grandmother was a librarian, so that was
Yeah.
the influence on me too. She would never give me anything I asked for as far as like toys or things, but if I ever asked for anything that remotely involved reading or learning, she was the first one there to help, get it to me or to help get the tools needed to study something. So it was really fascinating to have a grandmother who was a librarian because that just the encouragement to read was always there from her.
Isn't that funny?
But
That's
you
wild.
yeah, I know. But you've written a lot of different style books and genre. How do you
Yeah.
determine what your next project is gonna be? Because the Superman Wars is very unique, and it's different than poems and other things you've written. So how do you determine what you're gonna put your effort and time into?
I don't even have a good answer. I don't know what and next you're gonna ask, "What caused me to pivot to Superman?" I don't know. Sometimes these ideas just grow on you, you know, and after a while you think and sometimes it's probably a flaw in me because you'd probably have a better career if you just wrote the same thing over and over again and built your audience, but I get bored, and I've done a bunch of those, thrillers and crime books. I've written 3 books of poetry, as you mentioned. I've written some young adult and children's stuff, wrote a play, a musical, and I wrote several books on writing, I might add. So that's kind of nonfiction. But this Superman book is my first turn into biography and history, you know, total nonfiction. And that was a pretty severe pivot and took a lot longer than I expected, but it turned out really well. And I'm glad I
Yeah. No, well, I think that's a great thing to do though, is to pivot to what you're interested in. I mean, that's really what Books for Guys is built on from a reading standpoint, is I'm basically trying to encourage people to pick up something they're actually interested in reading so that that train of personal development and the excitement to continue reading keeps going. And maybe if you tried to stick to one genre your whole career, maybe you wouldn't have published as many books or done
That's
as
true.
much because you wouldn't have been as interested in it, which is totally fine.
Well, and everybody gets I mean, I don't care how good you are, at some point, it's time to do something else because it's getting stale and you're just repeating yourself. I don't think I'd gotten to that point, but I had done something like, I think, 10 or 11 thrillers in a row, and I just thought, "It's time for me to do something different now." Should have chosen something that didn't take so long, but I was really interested in this subject. I kind of got into it through the back door, although I love comic books and always have, but what really interested me was that this story about Jerry Siegel, the guy who came up with the idea for Superman, and eventually fights, stands up to power, to use a common phrase today. He's the first American writer to sue his own publisher. And it doesn't turn out well in the short term, but in the long term, it reaps many benefits for the creators who came over. So this is the most important creator rights battle of the 20th slash 21st century because it's not really over until 2016. And that's what interested me that, you know, I love writers, but I know there are a lot of vultures out there preying on all kinds of artists. And that's what drew me to this story. You know, it's
Yeah.
really a cautionary tale.
Well, let's dive in a little bit. So Jason created Superman, and obviously,
Jerry
like,
Siegel, yeah,
who
and then he got his best friend Joe Shuster to draw it, and they put this thing together, and looking back, you know, almost 90 years, it's hard to realize just how inspired, what a genius level idea this first ever superhero was. There's no Marvel universe, there's no DC. You know, there've been other heroes, of course, even some who wore costumes, but the idea of, you know, a super powered guy who can do more or less anything and telling these stories in these illustrated form, the comic book in its modern form didn't even emerge until 35. And here these guys are drawing the perfect feature. At least they thought so. They couldn't sell it. What Jerry wanted at the time was a newspaper strip, a newspaper comic strip, because in the mid 30s, during the Depression, that was the big gun. Everybody read the comics. They were wildly popular. People made a lot of money writing and drawing them. We can't even understand now, today, when that almost dead, how popular they were at this time. When there was a newspaper strike in New York, Mayor LaGuardia read the newspaper strips over the radio so kids wouldn't miss out on the next installment, you know? That's how popular they were and made a lot of people like Milton Caniff and others, Alex Raymond with Flash Gordon, very, very prosperous. So that's what Jerry wanted. And he sent Superman to every newspaper syndicate out there. Nobody's interested. Total crickets. They just can't see it. They're looking at and they're like, "A guy's holding a car over his head? Yeah, sure. Nobody's gonna buy that." And so he gets rejected over and over again, and it's only when he's run out of newspaper syndicates that Jerry finally agrees to let it be published in one of these, you know, by comparison, pretty shabby, low rent things called comic books. He had done some work. He and Joe had both done some work for this company, the way predecessor of what today is DC Comics. It was founded by a guy called the Major Malcolm Wheeler Nicholson, who was a former military officer and a writer himself. So he knew what writing was about, and he took care of his authors. He didn't always have as much money as he'd like, and he was sometimes late paying, but Jerry had learned to trust him over the years. And the major had been wanting to publish Superman since 35. And so finally, Jerry says yes. Unfortunately, in virtually the blink of an eye, this is all spelled out in the book, but somebody else, a man named Harry Donenfeld, with his associate Jack Leibowitz, managed to take over the company by means that are dubious. I'll just leave it at that. Harry had a lot of mob ties, which he was proud of. So, why can't I say it? During Prohibition, he was running rum. He'd been indicted for pornography twice. His main interest in acquiring this company was he wanted to use his publishing and distribution operation to publish something that wouldn't get him thrown in prison, and comic books seemed safe. He had no idea that literally a year after he acquired this company, he'd be a millionaire. That's due to Superman, who debuts in April of 38. He's an instant hit. Everybody loves Superman, kids and adults, although they might not admit it. Joe DiMaggio was a huge Superman fan, but he always sent somebody else to the newsstand to pick up the comics for him because he didn't want to be seen buying this scruffy stuff. And Superman is making buckets of money. They have more than 200 Superman merchandising licenses in the first couple of years. But most of that money is going to the company, not to Jerry and Joe. Jerry and Joe did make some money in the early years, to be sure, but of course, nothing lasts forever, including that. And there is enormous tension between the management and Jerry, in part because Donenfeld really wants Jerry to go away so that he can be Mr. Superman and take all the credit. And, it's in the book, but there's 10 years of abusive correspondence between Jack Leibowitz and Jerry. He's just taking advantage of Jerry's naivete. He's very young. I mean, they came up with this idea when they were 11th graders, for Pete's sake, and they're still in their early 20s. They've got no business experience. Jerry's father passed when he was 17, so he really had no mentor, no agent, no lawyer, nobody to advise him, and he made mistakes. And as a result, he lost control of the character. And the worst of it, stop me when you've had enough. But the worst of it came during World War II. Jerry was drafted. He serves his country overseas for more than 2 years, comes back and finds that not only have they completely taken over the Superman operation, including hiring all of his staff, including Joe, his best friend, but worse, they've started a new feature using one of Jerry's scripts that introduced a new character, well, semi-new character called Superboy. The adventures of Superman when he was young, and he's in a rural setting, and he plays pranks on people and stuff. Leibowitz had rejected this script 3 times because they had the right of first refusal. They turned it down, and then when Jerry's overseas and can't do they turned it down because Jerry was insisting that he would own this character. And they didn't want that. But then while he's overseas and can't do anything about it, they ran the script anyway. And it was successful. And so they started this whole Superboy series. And Jerry comes home and finds that he's been totally ripped off. He tries to work with them, but they can't reach any kind of accommodation because, again, Jack's attitude is, you work for me, and if you don't like it, we'll fire you. They've got a 10-year employment agreement, but I don't know what the value of that is when the boss keeps threatening to fire you. And so finally, Jerry's had enough. He files suit in 1947. It doesn't go well for him. He's totally outlawyered by these sharks. He does get a little money on Superboy, but he does not get back the rights to Superman. And worse, they fire him in a completely retaliatory fire, which would probably be illegal today, but they fire Jerry and Joe. And worse, remove their name from the credits. The creator credit created by Siegel and Shuster, no more, gone. Even when they would reprint old stories from the past, they colored over their names. So suddenly Superman is a character with no parents, and it goes on and on. There are theatrical cartoons. There's the George Reeves Superman, and go look at that sometime and look for the credits. There aren't any. It just says Superman's published by DC Comics or in Action Comics magazine. And Jerry and Joe then have so many very tough decades. Jerry continues to work, he hustles, he's writing constantly, but you just couldn't make much money at that time only writing comic book stories, and it was a major struggle for him, and, you know, that's what but the saving grace is he and his family never stop trying, he never gives up. Some people listening to this will remember that the company finally gave Jerry and Joe pensions in 1975 after an enormous PR campaign, and that's true. They didn't want any bad PR just when they were about to release the first big budget Superman movie. And so they agreed to give them tiny pensions and credit, $20,000, which was, as another writer, Elliot Magan, said at the time, about what they're paying their secretaries. And that's what they're giving the grade. Just to put that in perspective, Superman today, of course, DC is owned by Warner, at least for now. That'll be Paramount at some point in the future. But Superman by himself, on average, makes about $450 million a year for the company. Whether there's a movie or whatever, it's toys and games and underoos, and he's a huge cash cow, and they give the creators $20,000 a year. I mean, that's just so paltry. They did get later cost of living increases, but it never amounted to anything. But Jerry keeps fighting, and his family keeps fighting even after he passes. His wife, who, by the way, was the inspiration for Lois Lane, she keeps fighting. And these guys are still deposing. You know, they noticed her third deposition when she was 93 years old. These guys are just trying to drag it out and make life as hard as possible. She passes, and then their daughter Laura takes up the torch, and she carries it to 2016. I won't give away the whole story, but I will tell people that if you think this sounds like it's just going to be a lot of boring litigation, it isn't. If you think you already know this story because you remember when they got pensions, you don't know half the story. There's 50 more years of contentious battling, but it does ultimately come to a happier ending, and a recognition that this family has stood up and fought for what they believed they were entitled to.
Yeah. Wow. I just
Yeah.
that's just as you were saying the story, there's kind of another situation that I was thinking about, and that's the
Mhm.
story of McDonald's and how that came about as well. And it just seems there's always someone that's a little bit more knowledgeable legally, a little bit stronger, maybe just can pull some strings that the other, the creators don't know, and it comes back to really just put them it's just not right, for lack
Yeah.
of a better term to
Well,
say.
in
It's
that case,
incredible.
what people usually say is, "Well, Roy Kroc knew how to turn it into a national fry," and they say the same thing here. Well, the comic company knew how to publish it and make it. I don't believe that. I'm sorry, but I think anybody could have published Superman in 1938, and it would have been a huge sensation. Other than publishing it, which does cost money, there was no magic in what they did. They just reaped the benefit of Jerry and Joe's creative work, and that's what's really pretty galling. That plus the fact that they were so ungracious to the people who gave them this gift.
No, and again, I had no idea this backstory of
Yeah.
Superman.
See,
As a more
most people
casual
don't.
fan, I've just enjoyed the movies and enjoyed the product and just thought it was a great thing, but didn't I really had no clue of the legalities and the fight behind it all. Just to again, if you created it, you just want a little credit. I'm assuming they probably throughout this thing probably weren't being unreasonable with what they were seeking, and there was just pride, involved from the other side that kept that from happening. But it's, man, what resiliency though to continue to fight that long. Children get involved and get this thing to the finish line. Like most people would have just given up, and who knows if this story would have ever been able to be written because it would have just probably just been pushed under the rug. This was 50 years ago, and here's where we're at.
Yes.
So kudos
Well,
to them for putting
I
up the
mean,
fight.
that's the difference between Jerry and Joe, isn't it? I'm not trying to cast shade on Joe by focusing on Jerry, but it was Jerry's idea and his family that fought. Now you look at a Superman comic, and it will have not only Jerry and Joe's credit, but beneath that it says, "By special arrangement with the Jerry Siegel family," acknowledging the fight. Sometimes people say, "Why isn't Joe Shuster in there?" And the answer is simply, "'Cause that family didn't fight. That family caved." I don't mean to be harsh, but when Joe passed, the company offered them a little bit of money and they took it, and that was the end of the story for them.
Well,
Jerry's family fought.
and you can't fault them for not continuing the fight. You know, at some point, if you're not directly involved, it kind of fizzles out, I'm sure, and you know, no reason to think of them in a negative light. I mean, the they just got worn down, like most people
Exactly right.
probably would.
A lot of it is personality too. Jerry was always the pusher, the aggressive one, you know. He was the one who said, "We can get this published." And he was the one who kept typing letters and putting samples in the mail and shipping them out everywhere. He was basically their agent. So clearly he had uh, that personality. He wasn't going to rest easy because in his mind, somebody had stolen his character. And there's more to it, of course, than that, but that's how he saw it. And I think he could have lived with the fact that somebody else owned it if they had just let him have a seat at the table, let him be involved. But they weren't. It was just the opposite. They were constantly sidelining him, and that just made him madder and madder and madder. You mentioned the movies. I'll tell you a story 'cause I love those movies too. But when the first Christopher Reeve movie comes out in '78, I believe it's just recently that the first round is over and they're getting their credits again and they're being acknowledged by the company. So they've been invited to the red carpet premiere in LA of this movie. And so here they are. Laura Siegel, daughter, who was nice enough to chat with me about all this. She's sitting there between her parents. On the left, here's her dad, not only the creator of Superman, but the model for Clark Kent. On her right is her mom, the model for Lois Lane. She's holding both hands. I shouldn't even tell this story. I'll start getting choked up. But there's a moment, it's like 4 minutes and 16 seconds into the movie where, if you remember how the credits whoosh onto the screen in this big dramatic blue, it was the best title sequence ever at the time. Anyway, 4 minutes and 16 seconds anyway into it, whoosh, create Superman created by Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster. And the audience roars because they know how these guys have been fighting. And Laura feels both parents squeeze her hand and she looks over at her dad and there are tears streaming down his face. That's how much it meant to him to even have that moment of recognition. He didn't get any money from that movie. He had no role in the writing or development of it, but he was a part of his character again and being acknowledged for what he did. And that just meant everything to him.
That's amazing. I love hearing that part of the story. And William, with this being such a different I guess, different way, progression of having to get this story out there. What was some of the challenges as far as when you sat down and you're interested in this, but getting hold of the people involved and having
Yes.
conversations and having to do research. It's not just you thinking of the plot, putting it out there and creating your own story. You're having to get people to tell you and you correlate it in a way that's interesting to readers like me to follow along. But what was some of the personal challenges you had as far as trying to organize everything, talk to the right people, and go about kind of a newer process for you with this style of
Yes.
book?
It really was. And I'm here to tell you it took at least twice as long as I thought it would, probably more. I ended up traveling to, I think, 8 different states, interviewed more than 50 people, viewed a bunch of library collections, and I couldn't even tell you how many books or magazines or fanzines I went through, hundreds. I mean, my wife laughed about how every day she'd come in and there's a tall stack on my desk, but it's all different from what it was there yesterday because there's so much to sort through. But I was grateful for it. I was grateful to anybody who would talk to me. The Siegel family was and they haven't given a lot of interviews in the past, but they were nice enough to talk to me, both Laura and her 2 sons, Jerry's grandsons, Michael and James. But for that matter, on the flip side, a bunch of DC personnel and past presidents spoke to me as well. Whatever their corporate alignment might be, I think everybody has a sweet spot for the creators of Superman because remember, this was the first superhero. Jerry didn't just create a hero, he created a whole genre, which is more, which is in bigger today than it's ever been before. Now we've got the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and as we record this, Supergirl is about to enter in theaters on the heels of Superman last year. I mean, things are really hopping for superheroes, manga and anime. You go to the bookstore now, there's rows and rows of manga and comic books and graphic novels. And that all starts with a couple of kids in Cleveland during the Depression back in the 1930s.
Yeah, just incredible story, and I'm super excited to have your book. By the way, it's on the Books for Guys website, so anybody who's interested in learning more about it and going to find it. Obviously, I know a lot of people that listen and watch this are interested in this topic and watching these movies and whatnot. So I think they're going to find this very fascinating, and I hope it leads to a lot of people purchasing and reading the book as well. And so, William, kind of changing gears, 'cause I don't want to give too much
Mhm.
away, with this book. I think we've talked enough about it to pique interest and to get followers. But I wanted to ask you, yeah, exactly. I wanted to ask you about WriterCon and
Mhm. Thanks.
what is that and how did you create that?
WriterCon is an annual writers conference. There are some smaller satellite programs, but the main event is the annual conference, which is always over Labor Day weekend. So this year, that's September 4th through 7th, and it's in Oklahoma City. And I'm prejudiced because I'm one of the founders, but it's one of the best writers' conference in the country now. More than 60 speakers and more than a dozen agents, publishers, whatever you're looking for, it's there. And of course, I created that originally for a specific reason because I remember what it's like being a punk kid in a small town in Oklahoma who's telling people he's going to be a writer, and everybody's like, that's nice, you'll grow out of it or whatever. There were no writers in my town or anybody who could tell me how to get there. I eventually figured it out, obviously, but this is kind of my way of giving back a little and trying to make it easier for the next generation of would-be writers, and I think it's turned out very well. Every year, we have people who find agents or publishers and end up getting published, and it's turned out to be a really wonderful thing. We have a podcast too, totally free. It's also called WriterCon. You can subscribe to that and, get your weekly fix of the latest writing news, and, of course, we talk to authors and have writing tips and stuff like that.
Oh, that's amazing, and I'll include that in the show notes so people can find that
Thank
podcast
you.
as well. And that's incredible. I mean, 60 speakers. That's no small conference. That's amazing that you've been able to build it up to this level. Is it for authors who write all different kinds of? Is it nonfiction,
Yes.
fiction, poetry, anything that they are
Yep.
working or
We
wanting to
cover it all,
do?
comics, gaming,
Okay.
and more traditional forms of writing. We got you covered.
Amazing. That's very cool. It's really cool too to have it there in Oklahoma City, like where you're from. That's where you
That's
host it.
right.
It's not
But,
like you're
to
going
me,
to
the most
Vegas to post
important
there.
thing. Yeah, and I always say this on the first day of WriterCon in the opening ceremonies. I know you're gonna go to classes or sessions, and you're gonna talk to agents, and that's all good, but while you're here, meet people, make friends, even though, I know it might go against the grain because writers tend to be introverts and would
Yeah.
rather be at the library than socializing, but force yourself, I say. This is your tribe, and these are people who think the same way you do, and there's gonna come a time when you need friends, which relates to the Jerry Siegel story, because those vultures are still out there waiting to take advantage of writers or other artists, waiting to take control of your IP and make a fortune while you don't. And now we've also got, big money vanity presses and AI scams and all kinds of stuff that people need to be aware of. And that's why I say make friends. So when you get this weird probably written by AI email and you're not sure if this is a legit offer or not, call somebody, talk to somebody. You might need critique groups or beta groups or whatever. But most importantly, you need to know how to protect yourself. So, like I said, so what happened to Jerry Siegel doesn't happen to you.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think it's an incredible thing you've built and sounds like it's just continuing to be bigger and better each year. So that's really cool. We'll be happy to share that too.
Thank
And
you.
then just a couple more questions for you, William. I also wanted to mention your publishing company.
Yeah.
How do you determine? I'm assuming you've probably met some authors maybe through this conference even that you've, represented and published their work, but how do you determine who you all work with and
Hmm.
or what's the process like to work with your publishing company specifically?
It's about like any other publishing company, except perhaps smaller. And it's not just me. Some of my children are involved too. That's
Cool.
we didn't start it then, but it got a big boost during the lockdown, when nobody could go to, Alice couldn't work. Ralph had to come home from college because he couldn't live in the dorms anymore. And I thought, well, okay, here, we can all work on this publishing company, and
Yeah.
kind of did. And we just look for books that we like. You never know, but we've had some real successes. Betsy Kulikowski's got a wonderful series called The Veritas Codex that I love. My longtime friend John Woolley's written a book about Kane's Ballroom, which is a big music venue in Tulsa. And I love John, but when he brought this, I thought, well, that'll sell 10 copies. Wrong. It's like the best selling nonfiction title we've ever had. We get orders from like Australia. Everybody's interested in Kane's Ballroom. I didn't know, but I do now. So, full of surprises.
Yeah, it's amazing. Yeah, you just never know. I've talked to
Right.
several authors who thought the same thing. They wrote a book, they thought their mom would buy 10 copies and, maybe some friends and family, and all of a sudden they've sold thousands, and then others who have written a lot of books, they thought one book would sell more than another, and it was completely opposite. And so you just have to take your shot, do what you love, and let the cards kind of play out. But it's very fascinating. Yeah, we just don't know as much as we think we do in most cases, it seems.
No, wasn't it William Goldman? He was probably talking about movies, but he said, "Nobody knows anything." And that's
Yeah.
about right.
Yeah, yeah, that's
Trying to predict the
exactly.
future, what's gonna be that's why publishers publish so many books. The big New York guys publish so many books every month. They don't they don't know what their next hit is gonna be. This is true. 90% of what New York publishers publish loses money, but it's that one book that doesn't, that's
Carries
what
the
pays
torch.
for all the others, but they don't know if they did, they just publish that one book, right? But
Yeah,
they don't know in advance.
yeah. No, you're right. It's like that in all different, areas, finance, investments, so it's like that 10% that carries the load, but no, well, William, this has been a pleasure and an honor to have you on the podcast, and
Oh,
again, I know a
thank
lot of
you.
people who will watch and listen to this, they do follow comics, and they watch these movies, and I think it's gonna be very
Mhm.
they will be intrigued to read your book, The Superman Wars, as I know I am. And I think it's a story that I think a lot of people just don't know about it. They haven't heard it. And I
Right.
think it's going to be something that's different. And, nowadays it seems like there's a new superhero movie out every month. It's hard to keep up with. But to go deeper on this one character and hear the backstory that maybe a lot of people haven't heard, I think is going to resonate and be something that people want to dig into a little bit. And so we're proud to spotlight your book on Books for Guys. I can't wait to share this with everyone so they can watch and listen, and can't wait to see what future projects you have. Because at this point, like we don't know what that'll be. You may find something that's
I
similar,
know.
or
I know
different.
what it'll be. Bring me back next era, and we'll talk
That's
about the
right.
Batman Wars, okay?
Yeah,
And that story, if you can believe it, is even less well known and possibly even more heartbreaking, but we'll talk about that next year.
yeah. I was about to say when you have that book ready to be released, we'll have that conversation too. So we'd be very
Fantastic.
happy to talk about that. But no, William, thank you so much. This has been a pleasure.
Thank you.